In the spring of 1536, Anne Boleyn, Queen of England, took her final walk toward the scaffold at the Tower of London. Accused of adultery and incest by her husband, King Henry VIII, her fate was sealed by a single stroke of the executioner's blade. The crowd cheered uneasily as the once powerful queen's life was cut short. Just one of the many chilling ends met within these ancient stone walls. The Tower of London, a symbol of royal might, is equally infamous for its dark history of betrayal, brutality, and bloodshed. These stones have witnessed some of history's most gruesome executions, their stories echoing through time. Join us as we delve into the grim tales of the Tower of London's most haunting deaths, where power, treachery, and despair collide. William the Conqueror was forever etched into the history of England when he arrived in the 11th century to complete the Norman invasion. The city of London now bore witness to a new chapter in its long history, and the recently crowned king set out to leave his mark on the landscape. William did this by ordering the construction of a structure that would remain one of history's most formidable fortresses for centuries to come. Overlooking the mist-covered waters of the Thames River's northern bank, the Tower of London became a stark reminder of Norman's authority over the recently conquered Anglo-Saxon population. Its towering walls rose up to 90 feet in height and held a thickness of up to 15 feet at their base, making this architectural masterpiece almost impenetrable. During the era, it was the largest building of its kind anywhere in Christian Europe. The tower remained a luxurious fortress for subsequent monarchs in the medieval period, with each improving the castle in their own way. Royal records detail the exquisite redecoration efforts of the Queen's chamber under Henry III, which say the room was painted with roses and lined with winter and summer branches, whereas the royal menagerie, established in 1235, housed various exotic animals, including a polar bear gifted by the King of Norway in 1252. In time, however, a dark shadow would be cast over this symbol of Norman royalty, which would leave a dark stain on the history of England. By the 14th century, the common folk no longer yearned to peek within the thick walls, fearful of becoming one of the unfortunate souls who would meet their demise by way of execution. Towards the end of the medieval period in England, the tower had become infamous for a sinister practice that continues to unsettle even the most hardened of historians. London was a place of shifting power, and for those who got caught pledging their allegiance to the wrong team, a gruesome fate awaited them. Rebel conspirators, religious martyrs, and ambitious courtiers swept up in royal plots and schemes were often sentenced to death by way of execution. The first official execution at Tower Hill took place in 1388 with the death of Sir Simon de Burley. In the 400 years that followed, many prominent figures would meet their demise amongst the chilled winds that blew through the Tower of London. But none of the horrifying tales we will soon explore, which include the beheading of former queens and members of royalty, would have been possible without a group of unsympathetic men whose grotesque and inhumane trade made such a death possible. This is the tale of the Tower's executioners. The role of an executioner was a lucrative position, but carried with it various burdens. Typically, the Tower's executioners lived an isolated life and were permitted to stay in a portion of the castle. Like many trades of the era, the practice was passed on from father to son. Experienced executioners could make an annual salary of up to £23 per year, equivalent to around $15,000 by today's standards, and for each individual execution, the men received additional payments. The high salary showcases the skill level required for such a role. It is especially evident in beheadings, as the executioner was expected to handle a 7-pound axe, which came equipped with a terrifying blade measuring up to 18 inches long. This form of execution was generally reserved for nobles and royalty. In time, these figures would be immortalized in the history books alongside some of London's most notable individuals. Of these figures, a man known as Richard Brandon remains one of the most notorious. Known as the king's executioners during the 17th century, Brandon inherited the role from his father. Like most other men in the profession, the job required an individual with a conditioned mind, yet many surmised the act of killing a human in such a dark manner could lead to regret and guilt in later life. This was the case for Brandon. The executioner became infamous as the masked individual who executed King Charles I in 1649. According to historians, Brandon later admitted the treacherous act haunted him until his eventual passing in May of the same year. On his deathbed, the former executioner revealed the ghost of Charles haunted him in his dreams. Due to the grim nature of their profession, executioners developed various rituals in an attempt to cope with the consequences of their actions. Documents from the 16th century detail how some even asked forgiveness from those sentenced to death moments prior to the fateful blow. Meanwhile, Francis Threadkill, who served as the executioner of the tower from 1485 to 1505, kept a detailed diary of his time at the castle wherein he claims to have slept with an axe under his pillow the night before an execution. For the nobles and members of the royal family condemned to execution, the event generally occurred on Tower Green, which lay a short walk from west of the White Tower. The victim would be walked to a small wooden stage or scaffold in the center of the grass, and the platform was carefully constructed so that the citizens of London could witness the horrifying spectacle that is public execution. Once the damned arrived at the platform, their head would be placed on a large wooden block with a slight depression that allowed the neck to rest. Once in this position, the harsh reality of what was to come surely began to set in. Within these ancient stone walls, where the blood of the condemned has soaked through to the earth, legends and tales of the gruesome execution still force the hairs to stand on the neck of all who walk through the Tower Green. Here on this small patch of grass, the souls of 7 notable individuals departed this world, most of whom were sentenced to wretched death by King Henry VIII. He had a particularly bloodthirsty appetite and didn't hesitate to sentence an individual to death, including 2 of his wives. No execution has captured the imagination of all who have ventured within the gates of this historical monument quite like that of Anne Boleyn, the second wife of King Henry VIII. The Queen Consort was convicted on charges of adultery, high treason, and incestual behavior, and for these crimes, she would face execution. In the few days leading up to her death, Anne was permitted to remain in the Queen's house. During this time, she spiraled between states of hysteria and composure as the hourglass of her life slowly drained. On the morning of her execution, observers claim Anne walked to the wooden platform gracefully, seemingly having accepted her unfortunate fate. According to one source, on the night before her execution, Anne joked that the executioner was very good and that she had a small neck. Unlike the usual method of execution, which saw a tower executioner behead the condemned with an axe, Anne Boleyn's executioner was a skilled swordsman from Calais in France, whose swift technique allowed him to behead a person with one swing of his sword. Some historians propose Henry VIII ordered this special executioner for Anne out of compassion or sympathy. Nonetheless, her fate had been sealed regardless of the executioner, and the swordman of Calais decapitated the former queen with one fell swoop of his sharp iron blade at 8 a.m. on May 19th, 1536. The execution of Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury, 1541. At 7 a.m. on the 27th of May, 1541, Lady Margaret Pole became another victim of Henry VIII's bloody regime as she was led to her execution within the confinement of the tower's walls. Lady Margaret Pole was the daughter of Edward IV's brother George, Duke of Clarence, who was third in line to the throne at the time of her birth in August 1473. Despite a life of service to the Tudor dynasty, the 67-year-old's royal blood proved to be more of a curse than a blessing, as she was put to death for treason. Some historians propose Margaret's Catholic faith became increasingly out of favor with Henry VIII, others suggesting the rising of the North and rumors that her son Reginald planned to rescue her from the Tower of London. Accounts of Margaret's execution vary, making it extremely difficult to tell fact from fiction. One account suggests the executioner was forced to swing his axe 11 times to sever the elderly woman's head as he chased it around the block. While this account may be exaggerated, it stems from the writings of Eustace Chappfus, the imperial ambassador, who recorded the countess's botched execution in a letter to the Queen of Hungary. He attested that the elderly countess had suffered at the hands of a wretched and blundering youth, who literally hacked her head and shoulders to pieces in the most pitiful manner. After her horrid execution, Margaret's body was laid to rest in the Tower Chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula. The execution of Lady Jane Grey, 1554. Less than 2 decades after the execution of Anne Boleyn, another queen would be marched down the same harrowing path to her death on the Tower Green. The death of Lady Jane Grey, known to historians as the 9 Days Queen, is a tragic case of royal feuds and betrayal. Lady Jane Grey was Queen of England for just 9 days, stretching from 10 July to 19 July 1553. She was proclaimed queen as part of an unsuccessful bid to prevent the ascension of her Catholic cousin, Mary Tudor. Jane was a great-granddaughter of Henry VII and inherited the crown from her cousin Edward VI. However, as many considered Mary Tudor to be the rightful heir to the throne, she wasted no time promoting her claim, and the English people largely supported her. She went on to raise an army and utilized the help of several key counselors, including William Herbert and Henry Fitzalan, to turn the political tides against Jane. This led to the declaration of Mary as queen on July 19. After being deposed in July, Lady Jane remained at the Tower, but instead of a life of luxury in the castle, it soon became her prison. Jane and her husband Guildford were tried for high treason in November 1553, but Mary opted for mercy when it came to her cousin and was granted both a reprieve, allowing the couple to remain as high-status prisoners in the Tower. The following year, a Protestant rebellion against Mary's plans to marry Philip II of Spain forced the Queen to rethink her decision to let Jane live. Mary offered to spare her life if Jane converted to Catholicism. However, the former queen refused. Following this decision, Mary, believing she was left with no alternative, reluctantly accepted the Privy Council's advice and ordered the execution of Jane. As a woman of high status, Jane was granted a private execution within the Tower grounds an hour after her husband, on 12 February 1554. Jane's final words were dignified and aimed to inspire, supposedly having said, "Good people, I am come hither to die, and by a law I am condemned to the same. The fact indeed against the Queen's Highness was unlawful, and the consenting thereunto by me. I do wash my hands thereof in innocency before the face of God and the face of you good Christian people this day." Jane was dressed in a long black gown as she was slowly walked to her unfortunate destiny in the center of the green. When she arrived at the block, she asked the executioner to dispatch her quickly before tying a blindfold around her eyes. But as she groped blindly for the block, panic overcame her and she cried out, "What shall I do? Where is it?" Someone promptly stepped in to assist Jane, where she laid her head on the cold, blood-stained block. Just before the axe fell, the 17-year-old uttered, "Lord, into thy hands I commend my spirit." The Tower of London stands as a chilling reminder of the brutality that marked England's medieval political struggles. As the sun sets over this historic fortress, tales of restless spirits begin to emerge. Among them, the tragic figure of Margaret Pole is said to wander the grounds, unable to find peace after her harrowing fate. Legends speak of souls bound to this place, their anguish echoing through the centuries. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, one fact is undeniable. The Tower of London witnessed some of the most gruesome and infamous executions ordered by England's monarchs during the medieval era.